You're listening to China Africa Talk.
Jambo, ni Bridget akikuletea kipindi kinachohusiana na China na Afrika.
Vous écoutez le dialogue sino-africain avec Bridget.
Everything China, everything Africa.
Olá, você está ouvindo China Africa Talk com Bridget.
سيداتي وسادتي مرحبا بكم في الحوار الصيني العربي مع بريدجيت.
Welcome back to the program. You're listening to China Africa Talk. I'm your host, Bridget Mutambirwa, coming to you from the Chinese capital in Beijing with more discussions on what's happening with China and Africa from a Chinese and African perspective. China has concluded its most significant political event of the year, the Two Sessions. During the annual gathering, Premier Li Qiang delivered the 2025 Government Work Report outlining key economic and development priorities for the year ahead. This includes China's 5% GDP growth target and strategies to achieve it. For Africa, the outcomes of the Two Sessions are more than just policy announcements. They offer valuable insights into China's economic direction, investment priorities, and engagement with the Global South. African nations are closely watching these developments to understand how they might shape future cooperation with China. So what were the key takeaways from this year's Two Sessions? What new opportunities lie ahead for China-Africa engagement? To find out more, I'm joined by Charles Onanaiju, Director of the Center for China Studies in Nigeria, and Liu Baocheng, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Liu, what fresh messages came out from this year's Two Sessions?
Well, there are several key messages that the government have been focusing on. One is to keep the Chinese economic resilience by boosting its growth, and particularly heading into high-quality growth. And the annual target for growth is still set around 5%, which is there to measure the previous year's goals. So this reflects the government's confidence in stabilizing the Chinese economic growth despite some of the both internal and global challenges. The second is how to keep the Chinese financial stability by making a precise ratio between the deficit to GDP. So that's around 4%, indicating that the government starts to expand its borrowing and fiscal spending to stimulate the Chinese economy on both sides, which is there to encourage more of the Chinese factories to have trade-in, to substitute some of the old-fashioned equipments so that they can boost productivity. And on the other hand, government is spending more money to alleviate the local government debts and in the meantime to boost the Chinese consumption by providing more of the health care to the elderly generation and also the child care. And then to put forward more of the public spending, also to boost the Chinese employment, particularly for the younger generation. Lastly, I think the technological advancement is also taking the priority because China is already moving into the frontier for innovation, but how we can really amplify its application in the manufacturing sector, in the consumption sector, and that's still a question that requires both the business community and Chinese public to continue to work in line with the government directives so that we can have smart manufacturing, smart cities, and also smart consumption.
Foreign Minister Wang Yi addressed the press conference and described Africa as a fertile land of hope of the 21st century. There will be no global modernization without African modernization. What does this tell us about the future of China-Africa's modernization drive? And what is your assessment of the outcomes of the Two Sessions in relation to Africa? Charles?
Well, I think these statements are very profound, but also is in line with the tradition of China-African cooperation, especially as its trajectory continues to evolve. As you know, last year, September, the summit of China-African cooperation held in Beijing, and quite outstanding resolutions was made. The two sides decided to upgrade to all-weather comprehensive strategic partnership, and famous 10 action plans were outlined.
Right.
And of course, among them, we are the issues of mutual learning, for both sides. And it is important in the context of that proposal for mutual learning to understand the unique nature of each other's political process, each other's economic system, the structural manifestation of China's consultative political process that designed to forge consensus and inclusive process originating from its own experience as a foremost institutions for popular representation, for building consensus and taking very important decisions. Foreign Minister Wang Yi's statement underlines the centrality of Africa in China's international policy. He reiterated Africa is a land of hope at a point and a time in the world when Africa is viewed as a marginalized continent. China has a different view, and this is not only expressed, but in practical terms, China-African cooperation has chalked up some very incredible milestones and mileages, and the definitive statement that Africa is a land of hope simply exemplifies the resilience of the African people continue to throw down, even in an international environment where the international system is uncertain, despite the evidence of continued development, the evident trend that peace and development is the theme, yet there's still a fraught with a lot of challenges. So I think it goes straight to the heart of the African Renaissance, the struggle for African Renaissance, to find African path to modernization, and of course, the idea of no global modernization without African modernization. Strong expression, but also a call to duty to Africans themselves. Define your path to modernization. Of course, it's long been understood that modernization has nothing to do with westernization.
Right.
And I think it is a call to duty for Africa to look inward, for Africa to engage in looking herself in the mirror, finding a path that is suitable to you. And it is only a path that is suitable to Africa that can ensure its resilience. And China has made practical contribution to this effect. He also pointed out in the same press conference that over 1.1 million jobs have been created so far. More than 10,000 kilometers of road, highways, and railways have been built. This underlines China's strong contribution to African search for her own modernization. So I think China-African cooperation has reached an important point in history. It is becoming a model of international cooperation. I believe that the expression of Foreign Minister Wang is a graphic illustration of the future of Africa. But we must meet this future with strong confidence, with a lot more hard work, and we should approach this declaration of our destiny with commitment to improve our work in the economic sector, our work in the social sector, our work in improving transparency in our political process and bringing inclusion into our political process. These are all challenges. So while this is a declaration of faith, while this is a declaration of good faith by a worthy partner, it is also a call to duty for Africa to rise to the occasion. A land of hope in the 21st century, absolutely. That's the way most Africans feel. But then a lot more work needed to be done in this direction. So generally, this resonates with the optimism in Africa. This resonates with the trajectory of resilience in Africa. But like I said, a lot more work needed to be done. And China has proved a worthy partner, a partner that is both credible, a partner that is honest, a partner that is sincere. And I think it behoves on Africa to continue to work with China and fulfill the destiny of a land of hope in the 21st century, also optimizing our effort to advance African modernization, especially in the area of inclusion, in the area of economic improvement, in the area of social stability and the well-being of our people.
Bridget, I concur with Charles. In China, we have a saying that a long distance is a test of the horsepower and long years is the test of sincerity. So over the years, from the beginning of the history, China had any corner of colonization in Africa. And in recent decades, China has stepped up to continue to build the trust with African countries. African modernization is neither westernization nor Sinolization. It's African modernization based on its local standard, based on the will of its own people. And that is why China always makes sure that we will not interfere with domestic politics and respect all the decisions by its own community. So we have the three key tests in work with Africa. One is that do people support our program in terms of aid or other commercial cooperation? And then can it really turn out positive result in its social and economic development? And the third is that can these programs be recognized as positive by the global community? So this is the principle we always follow. And more importantly, we also say that facts speak louder than words. Instead of talking about democracy, freedom, etc. So let's do the work, build more roads to make people and goods more connected, and also, gave more of the aid to support the local community in education, in medical care, and then, gave more of the market opportunities to reduce the tariff and for them to export to China, with more of the value added, and then gave the technology to boost the human capacity and also their industrial capacity. Right. So these are the issues that China is very much concerned and very much dedicated. And that is why we believe, given all the foundations we have set up in terms of ideology, in terms of the layout of substantial deliveries in boosting social and economic development, we do have every reason to further this relationship and support the Africanized modernization.
One of the highlights of Premier Li Qiang's government work report is the around 5% GDP growth target. Now, what has China historically performed in meeting its GDP targets, and just how realistic and achievable of this year's goal?
Yes, China used to have outstanding performance of achieving double-digit growth, particularly in the beginning 2 decades of Chinese open door reform. Right. But people have to be cognizant of the fact that when you build a second-story building, it's going to be very fast. But if you really want to build an extra building on top of the World Trade Center in China's CBD, and so the growth rate is definitely not that high. But in the meanwhile, the additional growth in terms of the absolute value is still very impressive. So that's why to maintain 5% growth rate is there to meet the second Chinese centennial goal to achieve the prosperous society by the 2049, and also requires that we continue to boost the technological advancement so that we have better productivity, and also to boost the consumption by turning out more of the goods and services that are needed by both the Chinese domestic market and also global marketplace. Yes, we are also facing a number of shock waves from external and also internal environment. For example, externally, there is a lot more uncertainty going on with the continued intensification within the United States in terms of trade and investment, and also that the geopolitical confrontation is still there to disturb the supply chain. China is highly involved. For example, dealing with the Red Sea transportation, that's still a very high cost and a lot of uncertainty that's involved. But within China, we also have the lackluster performance of the Chinese real estate sector, and also the youth employment are also facing challenges. But having said that, the confidence is still there to maintain the 5% growth rate. One is that the Chinese inflation rate last year was only 1.2%. Therefore, boost the government package to stimulate the economy by supporting more of liquidity is there. We can still maintain a reasonable increase in the inflation rate so that people can invest ahead, both at the consumption and also at the supply side. And then to offer more of the government support to the innovation and also to replace the old equipments, old household utilities, so that we are be able to have the sense of entitlement to Chinese modernization. So this is a very reasonable calculation, And there is not much doubt, despite of some difficulties, to achieve the 5% growth rate.
Charles, what are your key takeaways from Premier Lee's government work report, and just how significant is China's economic growth to the global economy from where you stand?
Well, I think it's very important to understand that China makes a contribution of over 30% to global growth. This is very important. Like you know, it's a major trader and, of course, a major investor. For Africa, like you have really observed earlier, Africa wants to transcend aid. Like you could see recently, we have crisis of aid. It turned out that most of the aid offered by USAID from the revelation of American legislator was actually funding terrorism and crisis in Africa. So in the circumstances in which aid has become part of the challenge in Africa, Africa is clearly opted for trade, more investment and more robust economic engagement. And this simply means that Africa takes interest in China's economic dynamics, especially its outward investment, the robust structure of the internal economy. I'm sure the work report offered by Premier Li Qiang will resonate with most African countries because they will be looking at China's readiness for foreign investment, China market opening mechanism, and a whole range of issues that engages the African preference for trade, for investment, and others. And I think there's quite a lot. Professor Liu has said 5% growth despite challenges and, of course, more opening. China will be more open to the world. And then, of course, the mechanism of import expos and several trade expos. I think this will resonate very constructively in many African capitals, especially as the countries in the region up their hand, want to build more integrated economy, want more inputs into their national aggregates. I think this will reasonably resonate and we strengthen further the already existing mechanism for trade. And like Professor Liu suggested, more access to the Chinese market. Already, that three poorest African countries have been offered 100% tariff-free entry into Chinese market. I think some other medium emerging economies in Africa would want more. I am aware that the Nigerian side has been also pushing for access of more of our agricultural products. And like Professor Liu suggested also, access to more value-added products, you know, and I think this is quite significant. This also makes sense, again, the background of China-African cooperation in the field of industrial and production capacity cooperation, where China is supporting industrial growth, industrial expansion in Africa, and helping Africa to add more value to our products. So market access to more added value products to China will simply be a very important game changer in African-China economic relations.
Professor Liu, boosting domestic consumption is a key strategy for ensuring economic stability and growth. What specific policies can we expect in this regard, and what challenges might China face in stimulating domestic demand?
Well, one immediate one is the financial stimulus package to support the Chinese consumption. China is there to issue the $42 billion in the ultra-long special treasury bonds to support consumers to trade in their consumer goods, like changing their TVs into a bigger one, into LED ones, particularly for the lower tier cities, which is very attractive, and also to shift more of the old cars into new electric vehicles. Then the second is to support the Chinese private investment, because only the private sector is the main provider of jobs, because only jobs can really generate earning power of the households, that they can unleash more of their buying power in order to have the stronger incentive for consumption. And the third is to provide more of the social welfare program. For example, you know, how the Chinese young parents can produce more of the babies, because by estimation, one child up to the graduation from university could cost on the average of 700,000 RMB, which is the total salary of one parent. So therefore, we need to provide more support for childcare, for Chinese education, so that they can be alleviated of the burden to spend more on other type of consumption. And then, to invite more foreign investment by further opening store, by providing more of the rule of law. That also there to provide more of the quality jobs, give people more of the opportunities to expand their vision and capacity so that they will be able to earn more money. In the meanwhile, they may learn to set up their own companies with new startups. So these are really the measures to support the Chinese consumption by boosting more on the fundamental side of the Chinese income so that they can buy more and enjoy a better quality of life.
Charles, you did mention the aspect of zero tariff treatment granted to imports from 33 African countries. Now, just how significant is the Chinese market for African economies, and what further opportunities exist strengthening China-Africa trade relations?
Yes, of course, Chinese market is hugely important Africa, and it is obvious that further opening and more access of African products, more access, wider African products to China will be of very significant to Africa, like I've just told you. At the point when aid has become dubious, Africa is more focused on trade, expanding trade, and investment is very, very important. The Chinese market is quite pivotal in this effort. And I think some progress has been made in this regard. Like you have the permanent mechanism of the China-African Trade and Economic Expo, which holds in Hunan province, Changsha, every 2 years. Right. And of course, several China market opening mechanisms, including the fairs, become very popular in Africa, the Canton Fair, the Import Expo in Shanghai. These are all important mechanisms. I would also suggest that more access to African value-added products to gain more entrance to China, apart from basic agricultural products that are currently enjoying good access. Like, in 2021, when the 8th Ministerial Conference was held in Senegal, China promised to open more, asked to African to export up to 300 billion worth of products to China, and creating a special lane for concessional clearing of African agricultural products into China. I think this kind of mechanism can be strengthened further. And besides this, China is playing a very important role in infrastructure construction in Africa. Nigeria has just had its first deep sea port. This makes for greater improvement, greater productivity in Africa. So to be very targeted on this, China-African trade is viewed as essential part, very important part of African global trade. And it is taken very seriously. Like I mentioned earlier in our discussion, the Nigerian President Tinubu returned from China last September and inaugurated a special office called Nigerian-China Strategic Partnership directly under his office to oversee and report directly to him on progress made with China-Nigerian partnership. This underscores the very priority of China as an important partner for African countries, and the returns have been huge. Like Foreign Minister Wang observed, over 1.1 million jobs in Africa have been created in this context of China-African cooperation. So we want to see more engagement, more opening in this respect, and we want to see greater access to African value-added products to China. This will, of course, create a greater support for African economies, especially as they transit from aid to trade, more investment. So these are very significant for Africa.
Okay. I just want to touch on there was a lot of talk about AI adoption during the two sessions there. And Professor Liu, we've witnessed how industrial upgrading and technological innovations have been boosting China's high-quality growth, from new energy vehicles to AI models like DeepSeek. What are these emerging sectors contributing to economic stability amid domestic and global uncertainties?
Yes, productivity is supported by the technological advancement, and now China is facing a lot more challenges from the embargoes and sanctions, comes to access to high technology. So therefore, one key strategy is how we can really boost our own independent research and development programs so that more of the new technologies like AI and cloud computing data can be installed within China for both security and also productivity. And then all the advanced sectors require new skills.
Right.
So therefore, we need to go fundamentally as how to reshape our educational system by building new curricula, by building more of the capacity of those teachers in shifting more of their schedule to boost more of the critical thinking so that more of the innovation can be stored into people's mindset instead of simply to deal with manual work or the conventional managerial work. And the other is we always say that the need is the mother of invention. So we need to boost the domestic consumption, but in the meantime, to communicate better with the rest of the world, to forge more reliable partnerships so that more of the made in China and created in China can be able to spread out to the global marketplace so that China can gain extra incentive to enlarge its high manufacture capacity. And in the meantime, it's also there to boost more of the consumption and industrialization process in our partner countries like many of the African countries.
Just to wind up our discussions there, Foreign Minister Wang Yi reaffirmed China's commitment to the global south. Now, how does this translate into concrete actions for Africa, and what new opportunities does it create for China-Africa engagement beyond trade and investment?
As outlined by Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Africa is an integral part of the global south. Changes are taking place. Like the African Union has become a member of the G20. This year, South Africa, as the president of the G20, will be hosting the global fiesta, the global summit of the G20. These are all very important reflection of African emerging profile in the global arena. Within the context of the global south, Africa is becoming much more prominent. The voice is becoming much more highly considered. Becoming an important pillar of global stability, both economically, politically, and otherwise. And even as tension rises from United States trade war, and retreat from the global stage, I think China-Africa as a key factor in the global south will step up, of course not filling any gap, but playing more robust roles in advancing the interests of the developing countries and moving forward with the philosophy of building a community of shared future for all humanity, moving in the trend of convergence of global aspiration. These are all clear trends that are very discernible, despite some obvious retreat of some powers from the international stage, So I think China and Africa will continue to play a very pivotal role, especially in building a community of shared future.
Professor Liu, your thoughts on what new opportunities this creates for China-Africa engagement beyond trade and investment?
When we talk about the African modernization, for modernization, you need two real drivers. One is the industrialization. Second is urbanization. To support these two wheels, you need additional three factors. One is the continued capacity building, both for the labor force and also for the governance capacity, so that people are encouraged with new skills, with new vision, and new value to be able to adapt. And the government need to get rid of the corruption and streamline more of their red tapes to expedite the approval and supportive process for both domestic and global investments. And then you also need, of course, the basic infrastructure from physically the roads, ports, etc. to get connected. And then you also need more of the telecommunication so that people can share information. Then you need energy. Right now, to tackle with the shortage of energy supply, we also need to consider how green transition can be installed. So along all these dimensions, the two key drivers and three factors, China can contribute a great deal with its own capacity and with sincerity, and also with more of the historical experiences, particularly over the decades, that African people have seen China is really doing the right type of work on the ground. So therefore, with the trust, definitely we can really continue to boost more. Aside from investment and trade, we can do a lot more to support the whole process of modernization in Africa.
Professor Liu Baocheng and Charles Onanaiju, thank you so much for your insight. Listeners, for news updates on what's happening with China and Africa from a Chinese and African perspective, subscribe to our online newsletter on CGTN website and Substack. Search China Africa Talk. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post it on social media or leave a rating and review. Thanks again. See you next time.